5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start. The idea that war may sometimes be the only solution to international conflict is a contentious and challenging argument. The desire for peace is universal, and the global community has established various mechanisms and diplomatic efforts to avoid violent conflict. However, there are instances where diplomatic efforts, peace talks, and negotiation fail to resolve underlying issues. In such cases, some argue that war may become the only viable solution. This argument does not promote war as a preferred method but rather as a reflection of the tragic reality in which certain parties only respond to forceful action. To understand this perspective, one must delve into the complexities of international relations, the nature of certain conflicts, and the breakdown of communication between different entities. At the core of the argument that war can sometimes be the only solution is the idea that some conflicts are deeply entrenched in history, culture, or ideology. When two or more entities hold fundamentally opposing views or interests, the potential for peaceful resolution becomes increasingly limited. These conflicts may involve territorial disputes, deep-seated historical grievances, economic competition, or ideological battles that cannot be easily reconciled through dialogue or negotiation. In these instances, diplomacy may fail not because of an absence of desire for peace but due to a fundamental lack of common ground or trust. For example, in some cases, one side may feel that its survival or identity is at stake, while the other side views its actions as justified. This can create a situation where diplomatic efforts are viewed as either insincere or ineffective. Attempts to reach a peaceful settlement can be seen as a weakness, with one party perceiving that negotiations are merely a way for the other to gain an advantage or delay confrontation. Under such conditions, dialogue can break down, and the use of force becomes the perceived only way to enforce one's position. Throughout history, there have been many instances where peaceful solutions were tried and failed, often leading to armed conflict. Diplomatic channels, while crucial in preventing many wars, are not always sufficient when one side refuses to negotiate in good faith. In some instances, one party may use diplomacy only as a stalling tactic while preparing for military action, or may see negotiations as a sign of weakness to exploit. When one side continually disregards agreements or fails to honor ceasefires, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain a peaceful dialogue. The collapse of such peace processes often leaves no alternative but military action. In certain regions, a pattern emerges in which diplomacy is not taken seriously. This can occur when past agreements have been repeatedly violated or when one party simply does not respect international norms or the sovereignty of others. When the failure of diplomacy is compounded by a lack of trust in the ability of international institutions to enforce peace, some argue that the use of force is the only remaining option to bring an end to the suffering and destabilization. The concept that some nations or political entities do not understand the language of peace ties directly into the notion that power dynamics often dictate international relations. In this framework, diplomacy and peaceful dialogue are seen as tools that work only when all parties involved are motivated by mutual respect and have some interest in maintaining peace. However, when one party sees itself as a dominant force or feels that its goals can only be achieved through coercion, negotiations may be viewed as inconsequential. These entities may view peace as a mere temporary pause in an ongoing struggle rather than a genuine attempt at resolution. In such cases, military intervention may become a way for other parties to demonstrate that peace is not optional and that certain actions or attitudes will not be tolerated. War, in this context, is not seen as a failure of diplomacy, but rather as a necessary response to a system where one side refuses to adhere to the rules of international coexistence. Many international institutions were designed to prevent conflicts and provide peaceful solutions to disputes. Organizations like peacekeeping forces, international courts, and diplomatic bodies exist to mediate tensions and offer alternative routes to war. However, the effectiveness of these institutions can be limited. In some cases, these bodies are unable to act decisively due to political or economic pressures from powerful states. In other situations, they may lack the authority or capacity to enforce peace, leaving smaller nations or regions vulnerable to aggression. Furthermore, when an entity repeatedly ignores international agreements or challenges the authority of global organizations, the effectiveness of diplomatic solutions is undermined. When diplomacy is ignored and peacekeeping efforts are futile, the resort to military force may be seen as the only way to restore balance and protect vulnerable populations from further harm. The argument that war is sometimes the only solution is not without its ethical dilemmas. War, by its very nature, causes suffering, loss of life, and destabilization. It has long-term consequences that affect not only the warring parties but also neighboring regions and the global community. The impact on civilians, infrastructure, and the environment can be catastrophic. No one advocates for war as an ideal outcome, and every effort should be made to prevent conflict. However, there are instances where the use of force is perceived as the only means of stopping ongoing violence, oppression, or aggression. In such situations, war may be seen as a moral necessity to protect human dignity and preserve peace in the long term. If one entity consistently perpetrates violations of human rights or threatens the safety of neighboring populations, it may be argued that military intervention is justified, not as an act of conquest or aggression but as a way to restore peace and security. While war may sometimes be viewed as the only available solution, the consequences of conflict are far-reaching and long-lasting. Even if one side wins the conflict, the repercussions often include the loss of life, destruction of infrastructure, displacement of populations, and a long-term psychological and economic toll. Stop.